I am thrilled to be with you tonight, thrilled to be at Carnegie Mellon. I'm a little daunted by being a speaker before a panel. I've often been a speaker before the bar is open. Speaker before the panel suggests not to optimize for insight, not to optimize for humor, but to optimize for brevity, which I will try to do. I do want to start, though, with a warm welcome and sincere expression of gratitude to my colleagues, Minister Paulo Bogantes of Costa Rica and Ambassador Benedict Wetzler of Switzerland. There is no surer example of what digital solidarity looks like than the fact that they are in these seats tonight. And trust me, in the reciprocal case, when, not if, but when, they call and ask for me in San Jose or in Geneva or Bern, I'm there too. That's how this community works, and it's what we're talking about when we use the term digital solidarity. So everywhere I go, every city, every region, every country is trying to build an indigenous tech economy. People know that this is the future. This is how you generate sustained tax revenue. It's how you keep your young people from moving away. And we have a pretty good beat at this point on what the constituent ingredients are of a successful tech ecosystem. And two of the most essential, of course, are education and a capable workforce. So Carnegie Mellon, obviously, plays an absolutely central role in that, not only in Pittsburgh, but in the United States, and not only in the United States, but across, I think, our like-minded economies that are trying to work together to get things done in the world. And I speak with a little bit of firsthand knowledge because I actually live in a city that's not unlike Pittsburgh. I live in Portland, Maine, a city where economically sometimes it's easy to think that its best days were behind it. And we have legacy industries there like lumber and paper and fishing. And we have universities that are bringing innovative technologies to transform those legacy industries while also trying to attract companies and build new businesses in new areas. My wife happens to lead one of those universities. And so the dinner table conversation and office conversations that we were having today resonated with me in a very personal way. I thought, though, that maybe I'd say a few words about digital diplomacy and a few words about the world, at least the world as it looks from my seat at the State Department, leading the team that oversees America's technology diplomacy around the world. On digital diplomacy, so the theory of the case for us in the United States in setting up the role that I now occupy and setting up a lot of our other technology roles in diplomacy, foreign policy, national security. The theory of the case is that tech innovation as a source of national influence is increasingly foundational. And we mean something specific by that. Many of the traditional measures of strength that we're all accustomed to, like GDP, are more and more downstream, actually, of an economy's ability to innovate and lead in these core technology areas. And if that's true, then one, we better be certain that in domestic terms, we're doing what we need to do in order to encourage the creation and growth of these businesses, of this foundational research, of the training of the workforce, all of the pieces that undergird that economy. And then out in the world, we better be doing everything we can to make sure that those technologies are deployed and used in ways that align with our values and with some of the core foundational points that unite the United States government, the Swiss government, the Costa Rican government, when we in the world are talking about these issues together. So to that end, we wrote over the past year an international strategy for cyberspace and digital policy for the United States. Congress mandated that my office write it. And that strategy is really undergirded by three principles. The first of them, we talked about with some some journalists earlier. The first of them is what we call an affirmative vision. In a world where maybe there's some fragmentation happening, some balkanization happening in the tech landscape of the internet, rather than pounding the table and saying it's our way or the other guy's way, it's actually the responsibility of the United States and the responsibility of our allies and our partners to offer a better alternative. To say, like, we actually have a more compelling vision for what good tech can do in the world for our citizens. It has to be inclusive. It has to be positive. It has to be attractive. It has to be affirmative. And so we do start with that affirmative vision. I will say that the kind of the foundation of it for us, it has to be grounded in human rights. It has to be grounded in the rights respecting use of technology. I will offer thanks to our Swiss colleagues in this regard. The Swiss, by virtue of history, geography, choice, and have become one of the world's facilitators of these kinds of conversations. And even at a personal level, the recently departed Swiss ambassador in Washington, Jacques Pitelou, would convene these dinners, use his convening power, and very kindly, on my behalf, bring me and then invite ambassadors from across the African continent, or from across Southeast Asia, from across Latin America, and facilitate a conversation about human rights and tech. And there was no better way to be able to articulate an affirmative vision than in that kind of setting. The second principle undergirding the strategy is that we actually have to think about the whole tech ecosystem, like the full stack. We say from cables to cloud. So historically, the U.S. has talked a lot about cybersecurity on your laptop, on your desktop, on a server, maybe on a mobile device. But we need an integrated strategy that deals with undersea cables and terrestrial fiber and wireless networks and data centers as things virtualized, cloud computing, low Earth orbit satellites, kind of that whole spectrum, because risk federates across all of those relationships. The third principle undergirding the strategy is this notion of digital solidarity, which in fact is the North Star for the whole thing. It's the simple notion that no country, no matter how powerful, no company, no matter how secure its leadership position appears, none of us can go it alone. These technologies are intrinsically transnational. They cut across national borders. They also cut across every aspect of our lives, every aspect of our foreign policy. There's no multilateral forum in the world anymore, no bilateral relationship, no functional topic from climate to arms control that isn't being fundamentally transformed by emerging technologies. And so when we talk about digital solidarity, I think back to one of the last things that I wrote as a private citizen before coming into government, which was the first sentence in a Council on Foreign Relations task force report on cybersecurity. The first sentence of that report was, "The era of the global internet is over," which is not the kind of definitive statement the State Department likes to be making. Or it's not the kind of thing one would say if you were about to embark on a Senate confirmation process. But the future is unknowable. We published the report, and I actually think it's unfortunately true. It's not the future we want. It's not the future we're advocating for, but it's the future that we're increasingly getting. And so in that world, back to the affirmative vision, we need to make sure that the group that subscribes to a fundamentally rights-respecting view of how technologies are developed, deployed, and used is as big as possible. And one of the absolute shining exemplars of this in action, and I'm not going to say much about this, I'll leave it to her on the panel, has been the leadership of Minister Bogates and President Chavez in Costa Rica in the face of incredibly difficult circumstances. A terrible ransomware attack that could have caused a government to crumble, but instead actually caused the government to stand taller and stronger and become an example, a protector of its own citizens and an example to a region. And I hope you said a few words about that later. So those are the principles undergirding what this strategy, this American strategy, seeks to do. And I thought maybe I would spin the globe for a second and talk about 5 places quickly where we're doing it. And I'm not going to talk about Switzerland. I'm not going to talk about Costa Rica because it's not my place to do that this year. But this is happening kind of everywhere and all the time. So the 5 that I would mention first, New York. And we have to go back in time. It's easy in cybersecurity to criticize norms and say, we waste all this time developing norms, but our adversaries don't care about our norms, so why do norms matter? I actually think the normative foundation that ground game diplomacy has built over 20 years is kind of our superpower. And what I mean by that is, over the course of a couple of decades at the United Nations, the UN collectively, there was some American leadership at different points, but this is a consensus process, developed a framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace, which is a normative foundation for how countries behave in the digital world below the threshold of the use of force, which is hopefully most of the time. And that framework was a 1 yard in a cloud of dust kind of development over a 20-year period, and it resulted in a pretty robust set of norms. The Russians do not abide by them. The Chinese do not abide by them. The Iranians do not abide by them. The North Koreans do not abide by them, and they still matter. The norms still matter. The fact that they exist, the fact that every country in the world has publicly and repeatedly affirmed them, gives us moral authority that matters in terms of holding the line on normative behavior. So, New York. The second city that I would mention, a place I would mention, is Beijing. I joined Secretary Blinken on a trip to Beijing not long ago and spent the better part of a day with the Chinese Foreign Minister, Wang Yi, and had I can't quite call it a conversation, had an exchange of views on Chinese behavior in cyberspace. And we've been very public about this in many places before and since. So the PRC government is using cyber capabilities to hold the critical infrastructure of the United States at risk and the critical infrastructure of our allies in ways that are fundamentally not about intelligence gathering, but are about pre-positioning for destructive attacks. It's dangerous, it's escalatory, it's not acceptable. And that discussion needs to continue. But make no mistake, there are, despite having both affirmed the framework for responsible state behavior, our government and their government view this differently. And that is a discussion that's going to play out, I think, over a future that we're all going to have the joy of living through. So the third place is a little bit more off the beaten path, and that's Bletchley Park, an English country house outside London that was the home of the fabled code-breaking efforts during World War II and was used by the British government to host the first AI safety summit just about a year ago, where governments from around the world came and began the discussion in the ChatGPT generative AI era of talking about what these technologies are going to look like. How are we going to govern them? What system, what metaphorical operating system is going to prevail? And I'll just tell you, the US view on this was back to my foundational point, which is tech innovation as a source of national influence is foundational. The thing we didn't want to do was constrain the innovative engine of the American economy. And so the White House started with voluntary commitments. A set of commitments in safety, security, and trust that the leading AI developers agreed to voluntarily. Voluntary mattered for two reasons. One, by definition, it doesn't constrain innovation. Two, it's fast. And given the pace at which these technologies are developing, we couldn't get into a long regulatory swirl while the companies moved out without us. So voluntary commitments were never intended to be the last word in AI governance, but they were a pretty good first word. And we took them and began to internationalize them and multilateralize them at Bletchley Park, a fabled historic place to do it, and at the G7, where they became the basis of an international code of conduct for AI developers. And now in the year ahead, we need to push out to wider forum, places like the OECD, perhaps would be a good in collaboration with our partners. The fourth place I would mention, Keynote. I'm looking at my colleague Yair back here, who, by the way, said to me that he is in technology diplomacy because of Dr. Cronin, a former student of Dr. Cronin's. So I offer my profound thanks. Chisinau. So Yair and I were in Chisinau not long ago. It's the capital of Moldova. Moldova is interesting because it's on the far eastern flank of Europe. It's not in the EU. It's not in NATO. And when you're standing on the street in Chisinau, you're closer to the front lines in Ukraine than you are in Kyiv. The Moldovans have a pair of elections at the end of October. One is a re-election of the president, Maia Sandu. The other is a referendum on EU accession. So the Moldovan people are at a fork in the road. The Russians are exerting every possible form of influence to influence the decision that the Moldovans make. And that includes cyber attacks, it includes information operations, it includes more kinetic things that cross over into the real world. We're working very closely with the Moldovans, with some companies, with some other states, to help ensure that that election reflects the will of the Moldovan people, not the will of the Kremlin. And that is another good current example of digital solidarity in action. I encourage you to watch the newspaper in the latter half of October, because what happens in Moldova is a pretty good bellwether for what's going to happen elsewhere in Europe, and then perhaps even further afield. And the last geography I'll mention, just to keep this spinning in the globe, is Tuvalu. Nobody guessed that was going to be the film. Okay. So Tuvalu, an island northeast of Australia, between Australia and Hawaii, a population of 11,400. Tuvalu has been a really significant place in our work in the last couple of years because Google, driven by market demand and their own desire to get access to their markets and build resilience into their global information architecture, is laying about 25,000 kilometers of undersea cable across the Pacific. And this is a beautiful project because, again, not a single government dollar involved. Google's doing this no matter what. They're using trusted cable. They're using cable built by a company called Subcom in New Hampshire. And these trunk cables are huge multi-billion-dollar projects. This one happens to run very close to about a dozen Pacific islands, including two. And what the United States and Australia, New Zealand, and Japan, and Singapore, and a few other governments are doing is coming together in order to fund not the big expensive cables, but little branching units that we can put onto the cable in order to run a spur to connect small islands. So for a very small investment of taxpayer dollars, all of a sudden you connect the 11,400 people on Tuvalu who would not otherwise have been connected to the digital economy, tell an incredible story of digital solidarity, and preempt the build-out of PRC infrastructure across the Central and South Pacific. So just a few examples of digital solidarity in action. And maybe just in closing to bring it home, the US foreign policy, I suspect this is true of any country's foreign policy, is never any stronger than its policy at home. And so our foreign policy on any of these topics will never be any better, any more coherent, any more just or right than what our domestic approach is. And all that we can do is reflect externally whatever is happening here, whether that's good or not good. And so I'm really proud to be at Carnegie Mellon because Carnegie Mellon is one of our implementing partners at the state. We work with Carnegie Mellon through SEI on supporting a global network of CSIRTs, among other things. We're talking about how we can better link up our institutions to help train diplomats over time. And my final point is we need your graduates in public service, not just building the next hyperscalers. So it's possible to do both. And over the 40-year, maybe more, arc of any of our careers, I would just encourage any of you in the administration or on the faculty, or any of you who are leading businesses or pieces of businesses here in Pittsburgh, encourage your students, encourage your employees to, or you yourselves, take a stint. It could be 2 years, it could be 20 years, but it's essential. We need it. I suspect the Costa Rican government, the Swiss government need it too. We all need our fellow citizens with tech expertise, with commercial experience, to support our common objective of building digital solidarity in the 21st century. So thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be here with my colleagues. I look